Happy International Women's Day, and welcome to our special celebration, Women as Agents of Change. I'm Beth Ellen Holloman, president of Dining for Women, and this is the third year that Dining for Women members from across the country have gathered together for our biggest chapter meeting of the year. In Ventura and LA counties, in Peacedale, Rhode Island, Boston, Danbury, Connecticut, Rochester, New York, Venice, Florida, and many more, Dining for Women members are gathering in homes and universities and community centers to recognize today as the time to celebrate everything that women have achieved. For those of you who are just being introduced to Dining for Women, we are the largest educational giving circle dedicated to achieving gender equality and transforming the lives of women and girls around the world. Tonight came together rather quickly, but quite beautifully because of the passion of our event partners, who are all committed to change for women and girls. I want to first thank Georgia Public Broadcasting for hosting us in their wonderful studio and making it so easy for us to connect with people virtually all across the country. If you've joined us in the past, you know what a different event this is, and they are making a huge difference. And I also want to welcome the Georgia Public Broadcasting members. I'm also thrilled to welcome two Dining for Women grantees. Women's Justice Initiative, who flew in from Guatemala for this event yesterday, and Razia's Ray of Hope. Razia is here in our studio with us tonight. Their panel presentations will give you a taste of what Dining for Women members experience in our monthly educational programs. Tonight is also special because we are joined in person by the CEO of the Association of Junior Leagues International. We also have members of many Atlanta area junior leagues, and we're also connecting virtually with many of their leagues, and they have 291 of them in 4 countries, the US, Canada, Mexico, and UK. Today, Junior League members work alongside influential and corporate partners, government officials, and dedicated change makers to create communities where every individual is valued. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like to introduce the AJLI CEO, Susan Danish.
Wow. Just wow, everyone. Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be a partner alongside Dining for Women and Peace is Loud and Georgia Public Broadcasting to hold this wonderful event and really celebrate International Women's Day. The Junior League is one of the oldest, largest, and most effective women's volunteer organizations in the world. And for over a century, we've been empowering women to be community leaders who create lasting change, women as change agents. It began with an 18-year-old in New York who couldn't abide by the conditions that immigrants were living in and decided to make a difference. And here we are 118 years later with 140,000 women who are continuing to make change every day. It's so interesting that the first International Women's Day was actually celebrated in 1911. But we know that women have been making change since the beginning of time. And even when women are excluded from the official seats at the table where the official power is happening, women have always found ways to work through the system and find ways around it so that they can actually create change. And I love that. So International Women's Day for me is really a day of celebration, education, and action. And so we celebrate the women who've come before us, all of us today, and the women in the future who are going to make a difference. And we know that women make a difference. There's lots and lots of research that says, oh, that's good, I stuck my tongue out. There's a lot of research that says that women's leadership makes a difference, and it does. It's a day of education. We're going to learn so much from the panelists this evening. And then on March 25th and 26th, we'll learn even more when Women, War, and Peace 2 airs on PBS. And it's a day of action. One of the very first Junior League members was Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt said, "The world of the future is in our making. Tomorrow is today." And so it's so special that women are coming together, people are coming together to create new ways to take action and to make change happen. And I hope that all of us after tonight are even more inspired to do what we can to create that more just and caring world. A world of equal justice, of equal opportunity, and of equal dignity. Hooray for International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And now let me tell you a little bit about Peace is Loud. I became familiar with Peace is Loud last International Women's Day when I saw Abby Disney and Executive Director Jamie Dobie speak at the U.S. Institute of Peace in D.C. Abby Disney founded Peace is Loud in 2009 to inspire action through film campaigns and speaking events that spotlight women on the front line of peace building worldwide. Last year, Dining for Women members were also inspired by Abby Disney when she spoke at our national conference. And I knew that Peace is Loud and Dining for Women had something special. And I knew that it was just a matter of finding the right project for us to work on together. So today, on International Women's Day, I am ecstatic to announce our new partnership with Peace is Loud, which will give 50 Dining for Women chapters the opportunity to hold public educational screenings of the new season of the critically acclaimed series, Women, War, and Peace 2. So what is our common denominator? Peace is Loud, Junior League, Georgia Public Broadcasting, Dining for Women. We all know that women are powerful agents for change, both here in the US and around the world. And that leads us into our spectacular panel. We have a distinguished panel of speakers, but we also have a distinguished moderator. Georgia Public Broadcasting's own Virginia Prescott. Virginia is the Gracie Award-winning host of On Second Thought for Georgia Public Broadcasting. Prior to her work at GPB, she worked in New Hampshire with public radio, and she was also an editor, producer, and director of interactive media for New York Public Radio. Throughout her radio career, Virginia has worked to build sustainable, independent radio in developing countries and has trained journalists in post-conflict areas like Sierra Leone and the Balkans. I can't think of a better person to moderate this panel, and I am really grateful that you're here, Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Start my timer. Well, thank you all for being here. Today, when I was looking at Instagram, I saw a sign that said, "Empowered women, empower women." And we know that that's true. I was happy to see it. But I also want to introduce you to some women here tonight who have gone far beyond at great personal risk in some cases, to empower other women. And I think that we're all going to leave here feeling a little more capable of what we can do and possible of what we can do. So one thing I wanted to mention is that we do have a hashtag for tonight, hashtag Women War Peace, PBS. If you hear anything that one of the panelists says and you want to tweet it or put it on Instagram or social media, and encourage you to let people know that they can watch this live at gpb.org/women. There are full bios of all of our panelists this evening in the program, but I'm going to just give a quick bio from my left. Abigail Disney, filmmaker, philanthropist, and activist, a long record of creating and supporting storytelling, which asks some profound moral questions, I would say, and promotes systemic change with a focus on women's rights and gender justice. She produced the groundbreaking film Pray the Devil Back to Hell. She co-created PBS's series Women, War, and Peace, directed the Emmy Award-winning documentary feature The Armor of Light, and as we heard, she also founded Peace is Loud, and which is now in partnership with Dining for Women. Peace is Loud is also one of our partners for tonight, and we are going to be seeing A Journey of 1,000 Miles, Peacekeepers, of which she was the executive producer after our panel. So we have also with us Razia John.
Thank you.
Just thrilled to have her here. She's the founder of Razia's Ray of Hope Foundation. In 2007, she founded Razia's Ray of Hope, but before that, she had become a true force of nature, I can tell you, dedicated to community-based education in the rural district of Dasubs, Afghanistan, where she launched the Zabuli Education Center. This is a K-12 school for girls, and it was so remarkably successful that she has since started a college and a training program for midwives in the region, just next door. Her humanitarian work has been recognized by, among other people, First Lady Laura Bush. She got CNN Top Hero Award in 2012, and she and Zabuli are the subject of the documentary feature What Tomorrow Brings, which is where I first learned about her. And Elvia Rakek, since she joined Women's Justice Initiative, or WJI, in 2011, Elvia Rakek has implemented and overseen women's rights programs in indigenous rural communities in Guatemala. She's now programs director, playing a critical role in both developing and executing initiatives to empower Maya women and girls. WJI's programs provide access to legal services, women's rights education, leadership education, and have made a measurable difference in communal responses to violence against women. She is one of 10 women around the world to be awarded the 2018 Women's World Summit Foundation Prize for Women's Creativity and Rural Life. And to her left, Kate Flatley is going to be translating for Elvia tonight. Kate is executive director and founder of WJI. She has also worked on other projects in Latin America, in Central and Eastern Europe, and the former Soviet Union. Again, we will have time for questions of the panelists after the film. But I want you to prove that peace is loud and give this woman a great welcome. Well, each of these women work to empower others, but I'm interested in finding out about how they became agents of change themselves. And I'm going to start with you, Razia. You left Afghanistan, where you were born, in the 1970s. You were in school in the U.S., stayed away during the Soviet invasion and the Taliban, but then came back in January of 2002. What inspired you to start a school for girls at that time?
I think it's just that, well, when I was growing up, I had all the opportunities as my brothers had. And there was no difference between a boy going to school and a girl. And so my brother went to MIT, and I was given privilege to go to Harvard University. So I think, but I stayed away for 38 years and couldn't go back. And the brutal, especially first the Soviet invasion, and then after that, you know, the biggest refugees in the world till today was 7.5 million, and they were Afghans. And all kids, like children, really. And so they grew up in Pakistan and Iran. And then I think the first time when I went in 2002, what I saw is that I would work with different orphanages. And when you gave a toy to a boy, and he would be so happy, and he will take it, and then in a village. And then when you give a doll to a girl, 5 steps she would go, and the boy would snatch it from her because he would go and sell it. And she couldn't say anything. And if she fought him, he would beat her up. And I couldn't stand it. I said, this is something really that girls have no say, you know, and what has become of it? And what can you do? Only thing I could do as a person is to start somewhere, no matter how small it was, and really give that privilege of education to these girls and somewhere. And I found this area that was safe enough for me to really do something, because as you know that last year only Taliban burnt 40 girls' schools, you know, and they are always ready to maim girls and cut their noses and cut their ears, and how dare you go to school, or burn the school, or poison them. And so it's just something for me to start very small and in an area that I could trust the men. Also the men, those men never wanted their girls to go to school, but I worked within the community and made it possible for me to have a school for girls now for the 10 years. It's 10th anniversary. We started with 100 girls, and today we have 700 girls who are going to school.
Just amazing.
So
I'm going to ask you about how you won their trust, certainly, but I wanted to ask Elvia, because education has been a defining part of your life. Grew up in a small village, your father took you out of school because you were a girl, and you were expected to marry at 15. How did you defy those expectations?
Bueno, buenas noches. Cuando tenía más o menos alrededor de 11, 12 años, pues tuve que enfrentar a mi papá, porque a esa edad ya podía leer y escribir, y normalmente en las comunidades.
Good evening. When I was around 11 years old, my father took me out of school, and I had to confront that and decide how I was going to convince him to let me continue studying.
Me sacó de la escuela porque él pensaba que la mujer solo servíamos para casarnos, tener hijos, servir al esposo.
He took me out of school because he thought that women were only meant to get married and to serve their husbands and to have children.
Empecé a trabajar con él en el campo. Al principio pensé que era normal que me haya retirado de la escuela.
I started to work with him in the fields, and in the beginning I thought it was normal that he had taken me out of school.
Pero después miraba a las niñas que iban a la escuela, pensé que eso no era normal, entonces tuve que hablar con mi papá para poder reiniciar la escuela.
But then I saw girls who were continuing to go to school, and I realized it wasn't normal, and so I had to decide to speak to my father and convince him that I should be able to go back to school.
What did you tell him?
¿Qué dijo a él para convencerle?
Bueno, le dije que yo no iba o no soy la misma mujer con quien me estaba comparando, que yo tengo metas y que puedo hacer cosas grandes en la vida.
I told him that I am not the same girl as the girls you are comparing me to. And I have goals, and I have a lot that I want to accomplish in my life.
Y si él quería que yo trabajara o le ayudara en el campo, pero la condición era de que yo podía estudiar.
And if he wanted me to help him working in the fields, then the condition would be that I would help him, but I could continue studying.
Así fue, es que como la lucha con él para poder graduarme, y también mis hermanas pudieron tener la oportunidad de estudiar.
This was the fight that I took on so that I could graduate from school. And then also my sisters all had an opportunity to study and continue with their education.
But I think you were the first person, male or female, in your village to graduate from university?
Usted era la primera persona en su comunidad que se graduó de la universidad.
Sí, fui la primera fui la primera como la mejor estudiante de la comunidad porque entré a la universidad con beca y pude graduarme, entonces la comunidad estaban asombrados por ser la primera mujer de graduarme en la comunidad.
Yes, I was the first woman or the first person to graduate from university in my community, and because of my good grades, I was able to get a scholarship, and my community was really surprised that I was able to accomplish this.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. That's just the beginning. She's done so much more since then, let me just tell you. Abigail, I want to ask you, you're from North Hollywood. You grew up in a filmmaking family that some people might have heard of. You studied English Lit, I think, master's and PhD in English Lit. So how did you get involved in activism?
Well, first of all, I'm kind of humbled here with the company I'm with, and I'm kind of the image of privilege on this panel. So it's hard to make your way into a world of activism from a position of privilege. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the social pressures and the family pressures to keep yourself in line with expectations, keep yourself in line with other people's plans for you are kind of intense. And so I went off to college as an 18-year-old girl with a somewhat sheltered upbringing. I had no idea that I was a privileged person. I didn't understand myself that way, because when you're a fish, you don't know you're swimming in water, right? You don't know until you get out of the water that that was water you were swimming in. So college was just an extraordinary opening of my mind and my world. And I came into contact with people who changed me profoundly. So I began to there was a strand there for me to pick up on about social justice among the people I befriended. And I just kept, I guess, following the strand. And so I went to graduate school, and while I was in graduate school, I started doing volunteer work with homeless families. And, you know, the strand, you keep following it because, you know, if you have empathy and you work with homeless families and there seems to be an endless stream of them, then you start wondering why there's an endless stream, and you follow the strand a little further and ask yourself, well, what's creating these homeless families? And so that's kind of how I got into the life of activism. I just kept following the questions as they unfolded in front of me, and haven't been able to kind of sit still and let things be in life. And I tripped and fell over filmmaking. I didn't want to be a filmmaker. I didn't want to be a filmmaker.
So that didn't happen until 2008. How did this happen?
I didn't want to be a filmmaker because how can you not fail, you know, if you're me? Right? You know, because everybody's going to say, oh, she just made a good film because she had all the advantages. And if I make a bad film, how stupid do I look? So I wanted to avoid it, but I found this story in Liberia, and because I'd been working with grassroots women in New York City for years, this was a story about women who, at the grassroots, had accomplished this extraordinary thing of literally bringing the civil war in the country to an end as grassroots women, outside of the political process, and by their wits and by their gumption and by their creativity. And every journalist who had come through the country had seen these women and didn't think it was a big deal, or didn't think it was important, or wasn't interesting enough to talk about. So every journalist just left that lying there. But I had worked with grassroots women, so I knew what women are capable of. I saw what they'd done, and I had met women like Razia in a million places before, and so I knew that they are towering sources of power and change. So I decided to pick up that story and hold it up to the world.
Mm-hmm. When I saw the film about Razia, after I interviewed the director, and I said, how does she do it? You know, I mean, she's in this village with a council of elders that you have to meet with, about 30, 35 men, all former mujahideen for the most part. And, you know, they all think that girls aren't expected to be educated. They're expected to get married. And I said, how does she do it? And she said, the men push, Razia pushes back harder. So how did you get them to trust you? I mean, this is a place where they won't, culturally, they don't want to look you in the eye.
Absolutely. I think it's just, I mean, it's so, like the first day when I went to even found a place to build this school, and it's January, I'm standing outside, and I'm dressed like this, not fancy, but and my head is covered. And I stand there waiting for an engineer to come, and he's not showing up because it's January, it's snow. And a guy comes past me by and looks at me and says, "Sister, why don't you go inside? Why are you here?" I said, "I'm waiting for somebody." And it was strange for them, a woman without a burqa standing in this village, and, you know, all these broken homes and destroyed homes, and I'm standing there. And he said, "Well, why don't you go in and have a cup of tea with my wife? And when that guy comes, I can take care of him." And I said, "No, thank you, that's okay." So he left. 5 minutes later, he comes out again, and he says, "Really, I mean it. You don't need to be here. You are a woman." I said, "Excuse me." I said, "You know, your wife really needs you badly. I don't think you ever sit with her. She has made tea, go surprise her and sit with her, have a cup of tea." I'm not going to have a cup of tea. So he left. And then another thing happened is that the day we were doing the groundbreaking, there were really no women. I'm standing, and there were 35 men standing there, and there was a small bulldozer that we were going to start the groundbreaking and ceremony, and there was a poor lamb standing there to be slaughtered, which I hated, but I had to do because of the community. And so somebody comes running to me and says, Razia Jan, so-and-so Malik is saying, if you start this bulldozer, I'm going to come and lie down in front of it. I don't want a girls' school. And I told him in front of those guys, I said, well, tell that guy to come and lie down here, and I'm going to dig him and bury him, and then put a flag and say, this bastard never wanted a girls' school. Well, he didn't show up, and we did build a school. And I think those 35 men got so scared of me that I think till today, they want things, and I never say yes, but the way I say it, they think I'm agreeing with them.
Oh, there's a tactic. So you do what you want and make them think that they want?
I just am too polite with them, and I try to change things. You know, for years they wanted a boys' school, and I said, no, I can't, because my focus is girls. These are the girls that never had a chance in life, and I want to give them a chance. So I think it's something that for them to see a woman, and then I think this kind of woman that is really not scared of them. You know, every day I go and I drive about maybe first I used to drive myself, and I always thought somebody's going to shoot me, literally, while driving. How dare you? But nobody did. And then now I also drive, and they know me. And, you know, every day it's a thing that I might not survive. But I'm not giving up, because something good is happening in that village. These girls are getting educated. These girls are standing for themselves, for their right. And they are not getting married 10 years old. See, that is the change that we are trying to give them, that opportunity that I had and other Afghan girls had maybe in 70s and 60s. So it's something that I try very hard to keep focused and work within the community. There are a lot of stories. One girl that we do night duties for these, they have to do 40 cases of these midwives.
For the midwife program, yeah.
So one girl came crying to me and said, Razia Jan, my father is not allowing me to do the practical training at night. And I said, okay, do you have his telephone? She said, yes. And I said, what's your father's name? He said, Hisamuddin. I said, well, ring him up. She rang him up. I said, hello. And he said, oh, so-and-so, how are you? And you called me. And I said, what is your name? And he said, Hisamuddin. I said, my most favorite cousin name is Hisamuddin. He said, really? I said, how dare you not allow your daughter to go? He said, no, you are the mother. Do whatever you want to. And I hung up and I told his daughter, I lied the biggest lie of my life. I don't have a cousin named Hisamuddin. But it worked, and she did do her 40. So you have to really work within them. You have to work that they think that they are getting something out of it. But it's just for these girls to go forward because the culture is so harsh. And one thing I try to do with these girls, that when they come to school, it's heaven for them. I don't want anybody telling them anything, just behaving good with them and not hitting them, because other schools, they beat them up and, But the reason is that when these girls go home, I bet every day a brother is, knocking them down. Hey, you didn't do my clothes today, or you didn't do this, or the father, where's my tea, or the mother is saying something. So home is not, they are servants there. And for them to be here and have fun, and be themselves and really become something. And that's what it is. These girls are becoming good human beings, good providers for their family. And I think one day they will become leaders.
So this is something that, Elvia, you really have to think about as well, the cultural sensitivity, that you are working in a traditional culture. And this is, especially the Maya, indigenous people have been targeted for violence for centuries. And women, especially inside of that culture, that's something that you are systematically trying to change. So how do you approach that with people who are in power? And in this case, it is the men of the village.
Esos temas con líderes y personas que tienen poder dentro de la comunidad.
Bueno, como iniciativa de la mujer, empezamos a trabajar con las mujeres para poder educarles sobre sus derechos y así ellas pueden ejercer. Al principio es difícil.
So as the Women's Justice Initiative, we begin our work by educating women on their rights so that they can begin to exercise their rights.
Es difícil porque los líderes comunitarios, los esposos, los hombres son machistas, entonces ellos no quieren que abordemos temas sobre derechos y empoderar a las mujeres.
It's difficult in the beginning because the community leaders are men and the men in the community are machista, and it's difficult because they don't want us to educate women about their rights and their legal protections.
Entonces, cuando las mujeres empiezan a conocer y a ejercer sus derechos, pues ellas ven que la violencia no es normal. Entonces, ellas tratan la manera también de hablar con los esposos y de hacerles ver de que eso no está bien.
So when women start to go through our program, they begin to realize that violence against women isn't normal or acceptable. And through that, they begin to have conversations about violence in their family and how they can begin to change the dynamics in their families.
Por ejemplo, yo crecí en una familia en donde mi papá es machista y también es violento, pero al principio yo lo veía que eso es normal y que también la mujer es como su deber de hacer lo que pide el esposo.
So, for example, I grew up in a family that was violent, and my father was machista and violent. And so in the beginning, I thought that this was normal, and it was the duty of my mother as his wife to accept this violence.
Cuando empezamos a trabajar en mi comunidad, yo estaba muy feliz porque mis hermanas y mi mamá iban a aprender sobre los temas. Y de esa manera, mi mamá puede cambiar la mentalidad de mi papá.
And so when we started working in my community, I was really excited because my sisters and my mother attended the trainings and started to learn about this stuff. And through that, my mom began to talk to my father about these issues, and they were able to start to change his mentality within the family.
Did women previously report or talk about violence inside of the home?
Antes, normalmente las mujeres realizaron denuncias sobre violencia dentro de la familia.
Bueno, antes no, una mujer si recibía violencia no lo denunciaba, porque la mamá, la suegra, la presión de la comunidad, ser mujer es aguantar la violencia, y aparte de eso no se entendía también si la mujer estaba recibiendo violencia.
So in the past, women did not report violence because of social pressure. Her mother-in-law, and family and the community really didn't view that as acceptable to report violence. And often women didn't recognize that what they were living was actually violence against women.
Las mujeres cuando aprenden sobre sus derechos, ellas empiezan a denunciar porque saben de que tienen derecho y ya no permitir a que reciban más violencia.
Through our programs on women's rights and providing legal services to women, women begin to report the violence, and they begin to say this is not acceptable and file complaints.
This has been a huge jump. You had some data, I think I got from you, Kate, about how much this has changed inside of those communities. Do you have any numbers on that?
Yes, so through WJI, our work, the rates of reporting has tripled in the communities where we're working.
So it really makes a big difference, changing those minds one by one. And Abby, this is something that I think is so interesting about your work. I mean, there are so many terrific documentary films, activism and media campaigns. They give us the facts and the figures, and they incite you to change. But many of them, I think, target audiences who are probably poised to agree with them. And I'm wondering how it has evolved for you, this thinking about changing minds.
Right. Well, information is lovely, but it never changed anybody, ever. I mean, and you see it every day when you argue with people in your family and you say, but 40% of this is that, and your family member will reject it. We watched it again and again through the last few years in our political lives. When I made Pray the Devil Back to Hell in 2008, I watched rooms full of people change. This is a 72-minute film. And when I was in Kinshasa, after the film was over, I had 3 different men come up to me and say, before I saw this film, I thought women really couldn't do anything. And now I understand they can be very powerful. In 72 minutes, you can really turn the world on its head if you have people's hearts. And this is, I think, what I benefited from the family I grew up in, was we specialized in hearts. And if you remember the last really good film you saw, if you can just think back to it and remember that you were in this dark space and you were watching the film, and you kind of forget who you are in that moment. You're not even really in your body. Maybe your knee hurt when you came in and sat down and you've forgotten that. You really are sort of in this liminal space. It's a dreamlike space. And I believe that people do open very wide in those moments. And that you have, I think, a sacred duty as a filmmaker when you open people up like that to fill that heart with something good and useful and generous, something that pushes the world forward, something where that person will be in a better place because they just gave you 2 hours of their lives. And Hollywood violates that sacred trust again and again and again with violence and with violence toward women and so forth. But I didn't understand the enormity of the power that I was wielding until I sat with audiences. I went to 32 countries with Pray the Devil Back to Hell and showed it for audiences in Khartoum, Bosnia, and Cambodia, and so forth. And every room was the same. Every room was the same. There'd be a period of 20 minutes maybe where we talk about trauma. A lot of women who've been through conflict feel a little re-traumatized by the film. And then there would be this moment where one woman would get up, and she would be a woman a lot like Elvia, a lot like Razia. That one woman would get up and she'd say, "That's what happened there. What are we going to do here? What do we have? What's our problem? How are we going to fix that sanitation thing in Senegal? How are we going to end this low temperature war that is happening in southern Senegal, in Bosnia? How are we going to make sure the mayor of Srebrenica respects the Bosnian women who are waiting for their remains of their loved ones to come home?" Again and again and again, something bubbled up, and they came out of there supercharged and ready to go. So I don't think that what we are seeking to change is minds. You know, there's that hearts and minds thing. It's actually hearts. Hearts first, because minds follow hearts. So, you know, I was raised in a very conservative, kind of famously conservative family. My Uncle Walt testified for Joe McCarthy. He actually picked up the phone and called Joe McCarthy and said, "May I please testify?" So, you know, he was a John Birch Society, very right-wing guy. That is something that gets me a lot of currency among conservatives. People who are very, very conservative really revere my family. And as the polarization widens in this country, I felt very strongly that if I were going to respect the peace-building women that I met around the world, I was going to come home and try to build peace in my own country. I mean, I needed to stop flying from country to country talking about peace, and I needed to come home and be an American peace builder. And so I used that about my name, and I sought out conservatives who would engage with me. And I chose the gun issue, which is a very volatile, difficult, provocative issue to talk about. And I tried to construct a conceit which would invite people who disagreed with each other to engage with each other on a moral plane, on a spiritual plane, on an ethical plane, above the politics. There's so much space above politics that we share. And I asked them to inhabit that. I actually would say to people when we would get ready to shoot a scene, this is a no-fact zone. I don't want you to tell me percentages. I don't want you to talk about specific laws. I don't want you to talk about anything specific. I want us to talk about our values. And because I don't think conservative values that I was taught are necessarily reflected in the gun debate we're currently having. If something is socially destabilizing, it doesn't feel conservative to me. If it involves disrespecting people in uniform or being disloyal to your country, these are all confusing to me. And, you know, I made extraordinary relationships. I made incredible relationships. And I did so because I gave up changing minds. I didn't go into rooms trying to convert people. I accepted them where they were with love, and invited them to just have a conversation with me. And in knowing people, it stops mattering that you disagree, as long as there's a relationship. And so I learned a lot from that experience, and there's so much work we need to do. And in this country, it's going to be a question of individual people making the time and the space in their lives to know other people, invite them in, go the extra mile, and take someone for a cup of coffee. And there's no substitute for time with people and relationship. But it's amazing how far people will move when you give them a chance to love you a little bit.
So for you, I'm curious about how that sits for Razia and for you, Elvia. For you, I think, I watched the film, you know, every morning the principal of the school goes out and tests the water because it might be poisoned. I mean, that is an intense thing to live with. And what I was just hearing from Abby is the idea of if you lead with your heart, if you come to the table without being convinced that your position is right or correct, but you do have a mission that you know is correct.
Sure.
So how do you navigate that? And I'm wondering, especially for women, you know, a lot of the mothers of these girls have also been bound in these traditional values. What are the challenges for them to get out of their thinking or to change their thinking, to follow their heart?
I think it's just something that the young daughters are, I think, giving them that strength that they can stand for themselves. And I think, and they are talking to their mother, a mother who couldn't, you know, add 2 and 2, and now they are, because they are teaching their mother. They are teaching them at home to really, when they go to a clinic or a hospital, so they know which one is woman's place or which one, because they didn't know. And I think it's just, and they are also teaching their siblings. They are trying their brothers, like, so they don't fall behind, and they are doing their homework, and they are sitting and studying with them. So the boys are also doing well. And it's amazing that now the young brothers are bringing their little sisters to be admitted, you know, and vouch for them that these girls are smart and she knows so much, and please take her. And so it's amazing the change of these men thinking about, you know, their daughters and granddaughters. And I think the change has to come. You know, human beings are amazing, and you have to work within the system, whatever their mind or whatever they think. If you can work within that system and show that what we are doing, it's not going to harm them, but it's going to benefit them. And I think that is the change that we are trying to do. And I think most of the men are with us, most of the brothers and fathers and grandfathers, and, you know, so it is something. We have amazing 300 girls, little girls, that are on waiting list for kindergarten. And just before I came this time, a month ago, an old man came that has taught 40 years in a school. He's retired and very well known in the community. And he came to the office. I was sitting, and he had a little piece of paper in his hand. And he sat, and I said, "I'm so sorry," before he said anything, "we don't have any room for your granddaughter, or if you have brought somebody's name for this year. We already have 60 girls in kindergarten." And he said, No. I have 2 granddaughters who are smarter than my sons, both sons. They know so much, but they are 2 years old. And I want you to put their name on the waiting list for 2021. So when they are 5 years old, they have a chance to come to your school, because I might not be here, and they might not have a chance. I wrote their name, put them on the list, and we started year 2021 with them. So it is something that, you know, you see these things that they want their girls to get educated, and they want. I don't think so anybody in the world, and I think as if there are men, I think you love your daughters more than your sons. I know that, because it's in your heart. You want the best for them, and you want to protect them. And I think this is human nature. And this is what those men were. They were so scared. They are scared. You know, it's not their fault. But we've made it possible for them. to trust us and leave these girls to come and be in the school and go forward and, do things that otherwise they wouldn't be possible. So it is a trust, and we try to help them, and it's working. I mean, it's just, we are lucky that, I can't even tell you how. Sometime I just think of when I see these girls. Now I'll go in March, and these girls come in this little area we have, and with their green scarves, and there's like so many of them standing outside to get in. It's like my heart starts to stop. Like, how can I handle these 700 girls? And
Yes.
it's beyond belief.
So this is why the men, I'm so glad you're here. This is why you need to celebrate International Women's Day with us, because you have so much to gain from this.
Yeah.
And I've seen lives changed and hearts changed completely. I have taken Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which is predominantly about women in Liberia, to boys' schools to show it to all boy audiences. And they all ask the same question. They say, why are there no good men in this film? And I always say, well, actually, let's go back over it. Let's look at that. There's the men who are taking care of the injured and burying the dead and carrying their grandmothers out of villages. There are plenty of good men. The question is, why did you not see them? Why did they not rise to your attention? Because the guys with the guns tend to rise to our attention. And I believe, as you said, most of the men are with you. There's a certain kind of man who rises into leadership because he can trade on aggression, because he can be the louder guy. But I know my sons and my husband are not those men. And the vast majority of men that I know are not those men. And if women can move into the spaces where power is done, and if they can manage to shift this emphasis on aggression, on power, on trading on violence, on trading on threats, if they can shift that even a little bit, what do they free up in the men around them? Because men are harder on each other about gender than they ever are on women. And I know there are men suffering from what is expected of them that would be so liberated if they could only make common cause with women who can change this dynamic forever.
Beautiful. We're going to pause here because we're going to watch it. You're going to introduce your film, and we're going to come back and ask questions, more questions of the panelists. We will open it up to the audience. We'll get to a little bit more, but I do want you to enjoy this film. But for the moment, please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Elvia, we'll start with you.
So I introduce the film?
I think the trailer. Sorry, we're playing the trailer.
I am sitting there just in awe of you, and I just want to sit down and just listen to you all night. And I thank you. That was just incredible. Thank you so much. On behalf of Dining for Women and our event partners, Peace is Loud, Georgia Public Broadcasting, and the Association of Junior Leagues International, I want to thank all of you for traveling here tonight so far. You've all come from so far. And I want to thank Razia John, Elvia Rakek, and her translator and executive director, Kate Flatley, Abby Disney, and Virginia Prescott. Thank you for inspiring all of us. I am truly in awe of your stories, and I'm so thankful that you shared them here tonight. We want these messages to go beyond tonight, so I hope that all of you will share this recording with your friends and family and the men and boys in your life. And I also encourage you to tune in to PBS on March 25th and 26th for Women, War, and Peace 2, and see how some of the biggest stories of recent memory have been shaped by women. And now we're going to watch a trailer about these wonderful films. And so here's the trailer for Women, War, and Peace 2.
Yes.
Who survived Mubarak's rule, SCAF's rule, Morsi's government, and now back to a government backed by the army. And the same activists are being arrested and tried. It's not hard to remember what I wanted during the revolution, because what I wanted then is what I want now, freedom. The demands that were chanted sums it all up: bread, freedom, and social justice, including the fighting for women's rights specifically.
The British and Irish governments have announced a firm date for the start of all party negotiations on the Northern Ireland peace process.
We've got to do all of the things that we've been doing in our own lives as activists, but now we have to do them on the general political platform.
I'd never been in a political party before in my life. It wasn't politics, it was peace that I wanted.
We had to prove that it wasn't about sitting around a table and just talking about women's issues. It was about basic human rights issues for the whole of Northern Ireland.
পরে যখন আমার নাম এসছে তো আমার হাজবেন্ড একদমই রাজি না।
আসলে শান্তি রক্ষা কথাটা তো ব্যাপক।
বাঙালি নারী হিসেবে যে বাংলাদেশের দৃষ্টিভঙ্গি পরিবর্তন করতে পেরেছি, যে আমরা নারীরাও সেবামূলক কাজ করতে পারি।
আমার সবই আমার ভিতরে থাকতে হবে, মার মায়া মমতাও থাকতে হবে, এবং আমি পুলিশ সৈনিক যে আমার সে দৃঢ়তাও থাকতে হবে।
أكثر فترة حسيت حالي فيها حرة بداية الانتفاضة.
هذا الإطار النسوي كان هو للعلن عمل اجتماعي اللي هو الروضات، المشاغل الخياطة، تعليم النساء التريق، هذا كان اللي للعلن. بس هو في الحقيقة في الباطن هو كان تنظيم بحث.
النضال النسوي جنبا إلى جنب النضال الوطني، الحرية هي حرية واحدة.
Thank you once again to all the partners for this event and to everyone who joined us tonight. We're so happy that we could celebrate International Women's Day with you. And also, thank you for joining the biggest chapter meeting of the year. Good night.
Okay, then I will. So I think we're not streaming anymore, so we can go ahead and swear and curse and do everything else we want to do. So we're about to watch a film called Peacekeepers, Journey of 1,000 Miles, and you saw it referred to here in this trailer. I wonder if you can imagine being a Bangladeshi woman in a strict religious household, training to join the army and getting on an airplane and flying to Haiti as a peacekeeper. It is an incredible leap and a lot to ask of the families and of the women. But the role that women play in peacekeeping around the world and in peacemaking and peace building is of vital importance. The Palestine piece that you saw referenced there refers to the fact that the first Intifada was a nonviolent, explicitly nonviolent Intifada, and it was led by women whose men had mostly been arrested and taken out of the country or expelled, And I'm sorry, but when the men came home after the Oslo Accords, that's when the violence broke out. We leave women out of these processes to all of our detriment. We fail when we leave women out of these processes. And there is plenty of research to show that when women are involved in peace processes, they're durable. They last. The peace lasts longer. They're more likely to result in a democracy. They're more likely to result in a lively economy. We need to stop ignoring the role that women play. When I was in Liberia, there was an all-women Indian group of peacekeepers there, paratroopers. And my cameraman had an insane crush on one of them because they were sort of sexy in those outfits. But what the head of the police department said to me was, it's extraordinary. When I deploy the female peacekeepers in highly difficult and dangerous situations, the temperature goes down. And isn't that what you want when you're managing a potential riot? Don't you want the temperature go down? That is some ineffable thing that nobody really understands yet, and nobody can quite explain, but my goodness, why would we not tap into that, given the troubles we have around the world? So I hope you enjoy this film. It's a little bit of an intimate look into people's lives and their reactions to this kind of crazy alien situation. I love it a lot. One of the producers is a 2-time Academy Award winner, Sharmeen Obaid. And I love this film so much. Please enjoy. And I'll be here for a Q&A after if you want.
Hello.
I understand if you need to go. I totally get it. But if you have any questions about the film, I am happy to answer them. To put it into context, my first film was about women during wartime in Liberia. And way back 1 million years ago, when I was a PhD candidate, I wrote a dissertation on war novels. Because I was so interested in the way there was a presumption of masculinity around war, even though some of the language implied the presence of women, like rape and pillage, or house-to-house fighting. And I always wondered why women were written out of the stories, even though they were really in them. And when I think about the way we tell war stories, we generally tell them from John Wayne's perspective. You know, like if there's a camera that goes in somebody's forehead, it's John Wayne's forehead. And what I saw making the Liberia film was that if you give that camera into a woman's forehead, the whole thing starts to look very different, both in good ways and in not so good ways. And it seemed important to make that shift, to see war in a different and in a new way, and not to simply presume that we understand the dynamics of it or the challenges of it or the future of it. And goodness knows it's changed. So that's why Women, War, and Peace came about as a series. And Bangladesh, I mean, I love these women. They're pretty incredible, aren't they? And it's such a burden to them to take away from their families, but the pride they get from doing it and understanding themselves as part of a movement makes me really proud. So.
Well, it just broke my heart too much to end the conversation right there before we got to wrap up. So I thought, if you want an opportunity for all to ask questions of anybody, I mean, especially after seeing that film. Abby's right here. If you want to have we thought that if there are several questions, we can have several people who are thinking of asking a question, holding up your hands, so that we can maybe get a couple at a time. But let's start with, do you see, sorry, the microphones are in the wrong place at the moment, but let me ask you.
Shout, go ahead and shout.
Hi, my name is Robert.
Okay.
Okay.
Good evening. I have enjoyed this evening so much. The film had me in tears because of the family dynamics. My question is for Mrs. John. You had indicated before the 60s and 70s that male and females were educated. What changed? And I know in 79, but...
I think,
Thank you.
You know, it's 40 years of war. First, the 10 year of, you know, it was 10-year war with Russia, Soviet Union. And what they did is that they went village to village and they killed the men and raped the women and you know, beheaded them and then left. And so there was so much destruction. And after that, you know, the Mujahideen came, or, you know, it took 10 years. And the Mujahideen that came, most of them were these young men who were in camps in Pakistan that were trained in madrasas because they didn't have any parents. And America, you know, funded this mission to come and defeat the Soviet. And they came with Osama bin Laden, who at that time, I don't know how old, 23 years old or so. And they came and they defeated, you know, the biggest, at that time, power. And after that, you know, the Iraq war happened and America just left Afghanistan and told Taliban, you take care of it. And, you know, they were illiterate. They had no values. They never lived with a woman. They never knew what a place of a woman or a mother is, because they were all orphans. And they had no value. And the only thing they thought is to protect women and not to allow them go outside of the house. Or, so that was their thinking, which was so crazy. And in the beginning, they were very protective. And then as time went on and they became power, and, you know, a widow coming out of the house alone couldn't do it because they would take her, prison her, and then on Friday, they would stone her to death in a stadium that right now they play soccer and they play cricket now there. But at that time, that was a place, every Friday, they would bring these women, somebody wearing a red and a white socks. How dare you, you know, and then they would kill them and they would stone them to death, literally. So what are these, you know, that's the reason that everything changed, and it's 40 years. And there's no way that, you know, only way you can change is to give some right or understanding what a woman's, you know, place is in a house. And I think education is the only one thing that can bring this, how small it is, you know, but I think it is making difference. And there are right now 7 million girls are going to school, you know, in Afghanistan with all what's happening. But it's a start. It's a restart of a new generation.
Abby, I'd love to hear you pick up on that, because you've done a lot of work on this.
You know, it's commonly said in development circles that war is development in reverse, and that it's about 7 years of development to make up for every 1 year of war. And interestingly, Bangladesh looked a lot like Haiti 40 years ago. Bangladesh was just recovering from a terrible war, and the women mass rapes. But interestingly, I mean, Bangladesh was East Pakistan. It was part of Pakistan, and it has gone a very different direction from Pakistan in the last 45 to almost 50 years, in part because the government there committed early to reproductive rights, getting birth control to people, education for girls, maternal health. They invest in microenterprise, was really essentially invented in Bangladesh by Muhammad Yunus, certainly at scale. So Bangladesh isn't paradise, but it's also not Pakistan, and it's certainly not Haiti. And so I'm always interested in watching these women show up in Haiti and say, oh my God. Because when they were children, Bangladesh was not a lot better off than Haiti was. Haiti doesn't have a declared war, but it's been living essentially under war-like circumstances for decades, under successive, just wildly corrupt administrations and facilitation from the superpowers who've fed the corruption and never really attended to the needs of the Haitian people. So Haiti looks a lot like Afghanistan in certain kinds of ways because they've really never lived in peace, not for decades.
Are you catching enough of this? I just didn't know if you wanted to add anything. Okay. There are more questions, certainly. Yes, hi.
My name is Mati Brahima Sengar, and I'm currently Miss Atlanta Earth USA 2019.
Well, go on, yeah.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, ladies. And coming from a place that is urban, and when you spoke earlier about gun violence, this is something that really hits home. And I would like to know, in what way could we advance and progress as people? And coming from an African American community, this is something that we see and experience every day, and it's getting closer and closer to home. So being that you guys have experience with people who come from such violent environments, how, in what way can we, and we as people, as women, help these angry and violent people and trying to understand and put an end to it?
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
I'm also curious if you have any thoughts right off, but I was thinking, you know, I don't know if you know this, but the film that Abigail made, The Armor of Light, was made with Rob Schenck, who is an evangelical pro-life preacher, and Lucy McBath, who is now our congresswoman from the 6th District. Representing right here. And that, so I don't know, Abigail, if you want to pick that up, if you had a thought.
It's really important to notice how much like war some of the urban settings in this country are. And there are African-American people especially, but other people of color and low-income people who might as well be living through war. Lema Bowie, who went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 after she was in our Liberia film, has been bringing together women peacemakers from post-conflict settings around the world with American women activists. And what they're finding is there's no distance between their experiences. They're experiencing all the same things. And so I think that the difference is going to be, do we lift up women? And do women take care of each other, which we very often do not? And we need to love our sons in a whole different new way. And honestly, what I try to do, I'm a tiny little bitty person, but I'm trying to push back on the way media educates our children, which I think is a very big part of this problem. The boys in Afghanistan grow up in an environment of constant violence. And it's not unlike what our kids are learning from video games and television and so forth. So I believe that when a problem is 360 degrees, you're going to need 360 approaches. There's not going to be a magic bullet. But I think that we need to push forward on lots of different fronts with an eye toward dignity and justice. And I haven't seen a lot of eyes toward dignity and justice lately in American life. I mean, we just need to love our children better.
Hello,
Hi,
sir.
my name is Robert Henning. This is for Abigail. I'm a filmmaker, and I know you're in these violent situations. How do you protect your crew? And did you travel, anyone from the United States, and were most of the people local?
Right.
And did you have women on your film crew?
Yeah, we always work with lots and lots and lots of women, as much as we possibly can. There were times in Afghanistan when we were doing Peace Unveiled for the last series where the burqa came in very handy because you could have a camera under there and nobody would know. So in some ways, it's very convenient. You would be amazed at how much footage of war is buyable, archival footage, and footage from news reporters and so forth who go as stringers into conflict countries. So Pray the Devil Back to Hell had lots and lots of war footage in it. We didn't go into those situations.
You were there in 2006.
We were there in 2006 after the peaceful election of a new president. But this is important. There was so much footage to watch of war that we almost felt sick screening it all. We used every single shot that we could find in all of that footage of women who weren't lying by the side of the road being victims and crying. And that amounted to maybe 6 or 7 different images through the space of a 72-minute film. We had journalists say to us, we saw those women protesting and we thought they were kind of pathetic, which is why there was no footage of them. And I just feel that that tells us something very important about how we get our information and what we're asking for as consumers of media. Because stringers don't shoot only violence if they think they can't sell it. So when the violence stops, they shut the cameras down. It becomes uninteresting to them. So it's no wonder we think we live in a world of bad people and constant violence, because that's the diet we're pretty steadily being fed. So we have, we were in Cairo a couple of times, and Cairo was getting pretty dicey. We actually, for another project, my partner was in Benghazi 2 weeks before the big famous things in Benghazi happened, and the woman that we were working with there was assassinated just a few weeks after we left her. So there are scary moments. We try to protect our crew as much as we can, because I couldn't live with myself if something bad happened. But you have an important job to do, and you just have to do it.
So, woman, question up here.
My question is for Elvia. Hi, my name's Janet. Bienvenidos in Atlanta. Could you tell me, you mentioned that you got the women of the village to talk about their violence and the actions against them, and they'd report it. But what was the reaction of the police? Or did they just say, oh, we're really sorry, too bad? Or were there repercussions from the reports? What's changing in the community now that the women are not afraid to report what's happening to them?
Bueno, cuando las mujeres empezaron a aprender y a conocer sobre sus derechos, algunas empezaron a denunciar, pero la policía no tuvo como reacción así como negativa, sino que era más de los esposos y de la comunidad.
She said that when we started working in communities with women, that some of those women chose to seek help and some of them chose to file complaints. But the negative reaction really wasn't as much from the police, but more from spouses and other men in the community and the community as a whole.
Porque en la comunidad es buen visto cuando la mujer aguanta la violencia, está encerrada, no dice nada. Entonces, para la comunidad eso es ser una buena mujer.
Because in the communities where we work, women are seen as a good woman if they endure violence and stay closed in their homes and, just don't talk about the violence.
Cuando la mujer decide dar un alto, entonces la comunidad rechaza a la mujer. No solo es la comunidad, sino que también la familia, los miembros de la comunidad tachan a la mujer y la ven mal. Entonces muchas...
When a woman decides to put an end to violence, whether that's to file a complaint or to leave the relationship, she's rejected often in her community, and rejected not only by her family, but by the community as a whole sometimes.
Entonces las mujeres se acercan con las mujeres que son agentes de cambio dentro de la comunidad, que son mujeres defensoras de los derechos de otras mujeres.
So the women in our program seek help from community advocates who are women who are agents of change in their community and leaders, and they assist them through the process.
Ellas son los que dan el acompañamiento y seguimiento también de los casos de las mujeres para que puedan acudir con la abogada que está trabajando en la iniciativa de la mujer.
So these advocates accompany women and support them throughout the process and ensure that they feel supported despite that rejection, and they bring them to WJI's office to file complaints or seek help from us.
Al principio, pues ven la mujer que es víctima, pues le es difícil salir sobre esta situación, pero ya después ya no le da importancia a lo que dice la familia o la comunidad.
In the beginning, sometimes for women who are survivors of violence, it's obviously very difficult for them to leave the situation. But over time, with empowerment and education, women start to decide that you know, it's okay if there's rejection from the community and if you know, they have rejection or feel rejected from some of their family.
Trabajamos con la policía, entonces ellos están sensibilizados y apoyan a las mujeres cuando llegan a pedir apoyo.
We work directly with the police, so we sensitize them and we provide trainings to them around violence against women so that in the moment that women come to file complaints, they are more likely to support them and provide an improved response to survivors of violence.
I know I'm talking a lot, and I'm sorry. I won't keep doing this. But as Americans, it's very important for us to remember, and some of us are old enough to remember this. 45, 50 years ago, we weren't that different from what Elvia is describing. There was a general perception that violence in marriages was a private matter, had nothing to do, the police would not get involved. Women who left violent marriages were seen as bad mothers who were failing their children. There were no public resources for them, and there was no protection for them. Now, we're not living in a perfect situation now, especially for low-income women and women of color. But we have come a hell of a long way, especially in terms of at least making them somewhat ashamed of themselves. It's no longer a point of pride to have control over your wife, to have her be intimidated by her. We do have laws against marital rape, and we do have police programs that will protect women in these situations. That change was made by grassroots women activists who had no access to political power or money. They were not popular. They were seen as troublemakers. They were hairy, armpit, angry feminists, and they were just doing it because no men would ever accept them, or you remember the way we talked about feminists in the 1970s. So it is very important to remember that the women who choose to be unpopular and the women who choose to do the things that are problematic and unwelcome are the most sacred people because they are seeing a world ahead of themselves and building toward it in such a courageous way. That's what Razia is doing, that's what Elvia is doing, and we need to support them.
I say keep talking. There's a woman I think we've got one up here.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. I've truly enjoyed this evening. My name is Herman Smith-Sotsa, and I'm a cross-cultural communication specialist. I also do global health. And I really enjoyed the movie. But the question that I have is that, were you able to speak to the Haitian women who were being protected and find out what their views were? Because the film showed the reactions from the men. Obviously, they didn't want them there. However, there were scenes of, scenes that were very intimate between the women and the women they were protecting. However, I would have liked to have seen, to hear what the Haitian women themselves felt about their presence being there.
That's my frustration with the film. Honestly, I wish we'd gotten more of that. Our producer didn't really do enough of that. But also, you'd be amazed at how little time 54 minutes is. And when push comes to shove, you have to make some hard choices. And the decision was to be very intimate with the Bangladeshi women and to focus on their the entirety of their lives. And so you can't open a door in a film without going all the way through it. And so we just decided that door we would leave for another film, and then we would focus on the Bangladeshi women. But I'm with you. I always prefer to hear. I don't like to see women looking like objects, not subjects. I never like that. But in this case, we just had to make hard choices.
Question up here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the video. My name is Sky Walton. I had a question. I'm a self-defense trainer. In the last 2 years, we've had the privilege of going to Kuwait, and I personally trained over 1,200 ladies, about from 80 plus countries. And this past go in the holidays, Christmas time, we were able to reach out to kids this time and boys. So my question would be, I know we have to change, not just give them the education or the information, especially to the boys. How do we change that narrative? Because we even were able to, which was rare, train the actual police force of Kuwait, the women police force of Kuwaiti. In Kuwait. So how do we change that from the views of their husbands? They're raising these boys. Besides, we all know the story. Don't let a man hit you, but how do we change that to where men should not be hitting, men should not be pushing? It is a gender equality, that the abuse in the homes are not just for the girls, it's also happening to the boys, which leads to them becoming men and husbands that often abuse as well. How do we start to change that narrative so we can make sure we continue that through our company, Divas in Defense?
Yeah.
Elvia, do you want to speak to that?
Bueno, nosotras, por ejemplo, lo que hacemos también es, por ejemplo, hablar con las mujeres. Ya las mujeres hablamos sobre el tema de estrategias de la comunicación. Entonces, en el momento en que ellas tienen un espacio para poder hablar sobre estos temas con el esposo, entonces ya empiezan a sensibilizar a los mismos hombres. Entonces, también los mismos esposos a veces entienden sobre la importancia de conocer sobre estos temas y poder transmitir a sus niños y cambiar también las actitudes.
I'll try to translate all of that. So she said that we work from the perspective of women and educating them, but a lot of our work is not just on women's rights, but on life skills, like strategies for communicating and talking to spouses in your family. So we see that with women who go through our program, they start to talk to their spouses about these issues, not necessarily always about violence, but also sometimes about gender equality in the home and different things. And what we've seen is that then that conversation is passed along to their sons and daughters also, and it's something that's shared within the family. So it's starting to talk about different roles.
These things can be changed, and they are changed all the time. It takes constant effort and a dogged determination and a willingness to be unpopular and seen as a problem. But it was very different in this country 40 years ago on a lot of things. It's also a common given that in wartime men just rape. They just do because they can't help themselves. I'm sorry I'm going to swear, but that's some bullshit there. And if an army, a military unit, can take a young man and form him into a soldier and cause him to willingly go forward into danger against every natural impulse in his being, then they can tell him not to rape. So, and Napoleon, as he went across Europe, he summarily executed any man who was caught raping a woman. He was just not going to have that in his... Guess what? There was very little rape. So it turns out they can control themselves. And sometimes I do believe that it's the tolerators that are the bigger problem than the perpetrators.
And we have seen a lot of the men, they sign up their wives. They're actively signing up their daughters. So I know
Good.
It's a little bit more progressive than Bangladesh and Haiti, but hopefully they'll get there.
Yeah.
Because even just now, in the last few years, I've been there twice, and the response of men actually doing the signing up, it's a free program provided through Be Strong International with fencing champion Boson, that the men they don't care, they're calling, can my daughter, she's only 12, can we sign her up?
Right.
3 weeks. So thank you.
Right.
When you walk out with her. There's a woman just here in the front. Hi.
My name is
My name is Ollie Eunice. I'm a recent graduate from Kennesaw State's Conflict Management Program.
Great.
Thank you. And every day, every year, it feels great to be a woman, but I think this year it feels like I'm so much more empowered as a Sudanese American Muslim woman with everything that's recently happening in Sudan. It feels so amazing. So thank you so much for being here and having this. There's a million questions that came up, but my question is on trust, specific with the moving, just building trust in the communities. How did the Bangladeshi women build that trust going into Haiti with a negative view, I guess, on them coming in, which isn't uncommon. So how did they build that trust within the community for them to be able to do the job that they were sent there to do?
That's a really good question, and I think that goes back to the fact that generally perpetrators of violence in almost any society tend to be male. I mean, that's just not universally true, but violence is the single most gendered human activity. So there's that unfortunate fact. And so when women enter a community as a police force or as a military force, they tend to get a warmer reception, or they get the benefit of a little bit more trust. Now, maybe this will not always be the case. Maybe as we see more women in police, that will start to go away. But at least for now, that is almost universally true, that when a woman enters a situation where trust is necessary, it's more freely offered.
There's also some study in relation to police shootings in the last couple of years. I think it was a 2017 study, maybe out of UPenn, I may be misquoting this, that found in police forces where there were women, the calming effect that it has and how many fewer discharges of firearms there are in those communities. I think it's something that, especially as we're looking at training police to respond to threats or perceived threats differently, there's a lot of school of thought around what it would mean to have more women in police forces, which I think is interesting. Sorry, did we have another? Hi there.
Yeah, Ms. Disney, you brought up a very good point about communities. We have a community in America, and I specifically reference Atlanta, of undocumented Hispanics. I've worked a lot with them as a volunteer. I was the first Hispanic in Roswell 46 years ago. They said, "You don't look Hispanic." I said, "Really? What do they look like?" I can remember going to different places, and the women are afraid on a Friday night after their husband gets a paycheck and has a few drinks and beats the crap out of them because they don't want to go to the police because they're afraid.
Right. Yeah.
And we as a community have to be aware of those women and children because they don't have a safety net in this country at this point. I remember speaking to one man who was a, quote, preacher, and I said, "No, I went and told these women, you have rights. No one can hit you. Go to the police." And he'd say, "No, they like it. It means their husbands love them." So we as a community in America are back where Bangladesh was 50 years ago among some of our population who hide in the shadows.
Yeah.
And we have to shine the light on them as well.
Yeah. I'm going to let them pick this up because we're just about out of time. Elvia, I didn't know if you wanted to do that, or have you got thoughts on that, either of you?
Comentar sobre eso. Lo que acaba de comentar justamente es lo que se escucha en las comunidades, que si una mujer es golpeada y no denuncia o no hace nada, entonces la comunidad piensa que la mujer le está gustando que le peguen, pero...
And it's the same. She said what you've just described is very similar to what we see in the communities where we work, where they say that women who don't, who endure violence, that they must like it and that they want to be hit.
Hace 2 semanas hablamos con un líder religioso y decía, y le preguntamos, ¿qué fue que le animó que haya mandado a su esposa para participar en nuestros talleres? Y él decía, bueno, yo le dije que vaya al taller, que aprenda sus derechos, pero que no las ejerce.
So she said that just 2 weeks ago, they were meeting with a religious leader about our work, and they asked him, well, why did you allow your wife to participate in the program? Just as a side note, many women have to get permission to participate in our program from their spouses. And so he said, well, I told her she could go and she should learn about her rights, but she shouldn't expect to exercise them or assert them in the house.
Entonces decía, bueno, yo le dije a mi esposa, hay derechos de que en la Biblia no aparece, entonces no tiene que sobrepasar al esposo porque en la Biblia dice que el hombre es la cabeza del hogar, por lo tanto la mujer tiene que hacer y obedecer al esposo.
So he said that there are rights that aren't mentioned in the Bible, and in the Bible it says that the man is the head of household and a woman cannot claim more rights than him, and that she has to obey her spouse.
We have about 2 minutes left. One more question here.
It also says don't eat shellfish and you can have a slate.
So mine is the last question, I've been told. Thank you all so much for your incredible bravery to bring this forward and to share this with us tonight. I do feel empowered, and so I'd love to hear from maybe all of you or some of you who feel that you want us to go home with what is the most important message we can take home to our children, boys and girls, our families, and our community.
She's right on script.
Yeah, I think what I tell, and I speak a lot in different schools around here. We have written a book, which is a true story. It's called Razia's Ray of Hope, but this is a child who was not allowed to go to school, and then how did she manage to come to school? And that's a true story. But what I tell kids here is when I read that book and always tell them is that in life, as you're growing up, in a classroom, at home, if you can't help anybody, don't hurt them. Not physically, not with your word. Be kind. I think that's only, and I tell my kids at school, you know, I sit in my office if I'm there, and I see these kids running at times, and I see which one is bully. You know, always there is, of course, wants more power. And I call her, and we never hit them at all in my school. And I tell her, I try to make her understand that, you know, you have to be gentle. You can't be bully. You can't snatch things from people. You have no right. Everybody is even. So I think that's what my thing is, and I don't know what you have to say.
I love that because what I know from my own life is that life is much more pleasurable when you're gentle. It's a happier life, right? So as Americans, I think that we are swept up in a series of narratives about war. And this is why I'm a little obsessed with it, because we've been at war for a really long time. I mean, longer than any other war in our history. And there's a way that politicians and civic leaders treat war as an inevitable thing. It just happens. Well, autumn happens, right? People do war, right? So what we need to remember is to say conflict is the human condition. Conflict happens every single day in your life over parking spaces or over really, really important things. Well, parking spaces are important, but conflict is inevitable. Violence is a decision. And we need to separate these things out and make a conscious choice to understand that conflict is the human condition, and the pursuit of conflict with management non-violently is possible, it's necessary, and it's the essence of peace. It's the only way forward. And so that's what I would want all my children to know. They do. They're good.
Elvia, diría como agentes de cambio, vale la pena enfrentar los desafíos porque eso nos anima para poder defender los derechos de las otras mujeres y ser ejemplo para la comunidad.
I would say, the translation is getting tough. I would say that as agents of change, that we should, oh, now I've forgotten, ¿qué diría que qué?
Que vale la pena enfrentar los desafíos, que eso nos anima para poder defender los derechos de las otras mujeres.
That it is worth confronting the challenges because that is what animates us and drives us to continue and to make change.
Right. I'm going to say Kate has done a remarkable job translating this evening. We're all, as we're hearing, empowered to make change. We're all change agents. I think it's just a decision or a series of little decisions on a daily basis. My first is going to be to thank this fantastic panel of folks. Elvira Rakek, Razia John, Abigail Disney, and Kate Flatley. Thank you so much. Thank you to our partners.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
That's great.